Hello and welcome to the channel. Today we are going to be reviewing the Benelli TRK502X. But before we do, roll the credits. Okay, the first thing we notice as we approach the bike is the bike looks imposing. It is a big, tall bike. This thing wouldn't look too far from a BMW GS 1250. That's the type of size that you're looking at for the bike. It's not quite as big, but it's not far off that type of bike. To get on the bike, I have to use the foot peg as a step to step up and over, and you actually sit inside the bike. The tank, the top of the tank sort of comes to about your sternum level. The foot pegs of the bike, your legs are bent just past 90 degrees, your knees tuck in underneath the tank, and your heel is directly below your spine. The seat is nice and comfortable. It's quite firm, but you could sit in the seat all day with no problems. It wouldn't be too hard. The seat doesn't push you forward or push you back, and it's just wide enough to make this a comfortable ride. The handlebars of the bike seem in proportion with the rest of the bike. They just seem to be the right width and right height. The switchgear is a good quality. It feels really solid. There's a good, nice tactile feel to all the switches. The clutch lever is quite a wide span. I wear large gloves and I have to really reach forward just to get the tips of my fingers to reach over the edge of the lever. So if you've got small hands, you may struggle with that a little bit. There's no adjustability. You can't adjust the span to the front lever on the clutch side. On the brake side, that is adjustable for span. I've got that on setting 4 and I can easily get my fingers around to grip the brake. The clutch, it's not the lightest of clutch, but it doesn't take a lot of effort to pull. It's not a really heavy clutch, so no problems with the clutch. The mirrors are a nice width and nice shape. I would say the first quarter of the mirror on the inside is taken up by my arms, and the rest I can see quite well behind me. The clock is just a simple LCD. There's no rider modes or anything like that. You've just got a speedo, total miles travelled, you've got trip A, trip B, speedo, temperature gauge, a clock telling you the time, gear changer, and you also have a fuel gauge, which is very nice and useful. Okay, let's start the bike up. The screen I have on this bike is an aftermarket screen. It's slightly taller. I found that the standard screen was too low and it gave me a lot of wind blast and turbulence around my upper shoulders and head. This is a Puig aftermarket screen and it does help a lot. It really does make the bike a comfortable place to be at speed. The only downside of this is that because of my height, the eye line, this top of the screen is just in my eye line. Okay, let's take the bike out and see how she handles. Okay, first of all, the gearbox. The gearbox is really nice and crisp. You get an audible and you can feel a click through the actual gear pedal as you change through the gears. Some people say it's agricultural. I don't find it agricultural at all. You can easily find neutral. You never have any difficulty selecting gears at low speed or at high speed. The tyres on the bike are Metzeler Tourance, and I have to say I have had absolutely no problems with these tyres. They do inspire confidence in all conditions, both wet and dry, cold and warm. The suspension on the bike is really nice. It's what I would call a very supple plush suspension. That isn't to say that the suspension is too soft. It's not. It makes the bike very stable. It can handle hard braking into bends and hard acceleration out. It never gets unsettled in a bend if you hit uneven road surfaces. I'll just give you a little show of what the bike's like through the twisties at speed. A lot is said about the bike's weight, saying that it's far too heavy for the size of engine. However, you know, on this bike, because the bike is so good at going around bends and cornering, it just falls into the corners so well. The weight actually benefits the bike because the bike feels so stable at speed going around these corners and these twisties, far more so than a bike of this stature, of this type, should do. You don't have to force it around the bends or into bends. It just laps it up, no problem whatsoever. You know, very little input to actually get the bike to go around bends. The sitting position on the bike, you're nice and protected from the elements. You've got this big wide tank and your legs sort of tuck underneath into the side of the tank, and it keeps the wind off your upper legs. There's very good wind protection for the lower limbs as well. When you're riding the bike in the rain, your feet don't get soaking wet like they do on some bikes. Your upper body position, the way that you're positioned, you're mostly upright, slightly leaning forward, I would say, but there's no pressure on your wrists or elbows or shoulders. It's a very, very nice position to ride the bike, and you could ride this bike for many an hour, I feel. A lot said about the bike being underpowered. I totally disagree with that. I think for everyday average riding and even touring, the bike is powered just adequately. You know, you can have fun through the twisties on this bike. There is a lot of roll-on power from about 40 up until 80. Yes, once you hit 80, it does run out of puff and there's not much acceleration there after that, but you know, in everyday riding, that is ample. I will show you the roll-on power here. This is 5th gear, and as you can see, absolutely no effortless overtaking. You don't have to, yeah, I've heard it said, oh, you have to put a lot of thought in how you ride this bike to make good progress. I don't think you do. If you're struggling to make progress on this bike, then go and get some rider training, because it's an easy bike to ride. With the weight, as I said, going into bends, it does make the bike feel so stable and so easy to control. It really does feel as though it's on rails, which would be good for a new rider. You know, if this is your first big bike, the one thing I would say, you know, on the other side, it might not be that good for a new rider if you were short of stature because of the height, and if you weren't physically strong, being able to get on and off the centre stand and move it around, then that is a downside for new riders. The brakes are really nice and linear, they're not grabby. When you first pull the brake, you don't get that much feedback through the front wheel. However, within a couple of millimeters more pressure, you do start to get feedback through the front wheel. The relationship to how much pressure you put on the brake to how much braking you actually get also feels very natural. You do get some bikes where, you know, you can absolutely strangle the front brake, squeeze it as hard as you can, and you don't seem to get much braking action at all. Other bikes, you only have to breathe on the front brake lever and the thing's standing on its nose. This just feels natural for the bike. You know, it does inspire confidence that it's going to stop when and where you want it to. You do feel like you have control over the bike and the braking. The back brake is nothing special. it's quite soft. You can feel it bite when you press the brake pedal down. It's very nice and progressive. It doesn't grab. It's good for going into slippery roundabouts or tight bends, and you want that little bit of tail braking action. It's very good for that kind of braking. However, it's not going to set the wheel on fire. It's not like throwing out an anchor, but it's acceptable, it's reasonable, it's usable for everyday riding. You do get a little buzziness through the pegs and through the handlebars when you're riding the bike over about 55 miles an hour. However, this has diminished with the more miles that I've put on the clock. It's hardly noticeable, it's not intrusive, it doesn't spoil the ride, or it's not uncomfortable. You know, it's not one of those bikes where you get pins and needles in your feet or your fingers because of the buzziness. It's a very high frequency buzz as well, so you know it's more like a drone type of feeling. Just lets you know that the engine's working at speeds. With this screen on, there's very little turbulence. I've got no turbulence around my head. I can just feel the wind hitting the very tops of the outside of my shoulders. I've got a peaked helmet on as well, so I'm getting virtually no turbulence or wind blast to my head region at all with this Puig screen on, which is always a benefit, especially if you're doing long trips on the motorway. There's nothing worse than having a turbulent air banging your eyeballs out of your head. Range on the tank, it's got a good range, anything in between I would say about 160, 170 to around about 200 miles an hour, depending on what type of riding you're doing. We're just riding around on the English side of the Scottish borders now that the lockdown has been lifted, or relaxed should I say, and it's an absolutely beautiful place to be riding a bike. Fantastic countryside, fantastic roads. Even when lockdown's fully off, the roads aren't that crowded once you get off the main holiday routes. We're very lucky to live out here. The one thing I would say, you know, if you're coming out to rural areas anywhere in the country, just adapt your riding techniques. You do get a lot of debris on country roads. You get a lot of these stone chippings because they like to redress the roads. The chippings become loose and they build up at the side of the road on junctions, in the centre of the bends. As you go around a bend, the line you want to cut through, and there's a big pile of chippings there. Very dangerous. We also have you know, when the tractors come out of the field with all the mud on the tyres, and they can deposit that all over the road, and when that gets wet, that's really slippy. Whenever I go into a bend, I always don't overcommit. I'm always at a speed where I can change my line at any time that I want to. I think if you're going into a bend at a speed where you can only manage the one line when you're riding out in the country, you're asking for trouble. So if you see me riding along and I seem to be taking strange lines, sometimes the GoPro doesn't pick up what's actually on the road in front of me. It's not my poor riding skills. Ooh, that was close. And there is another prime example, you know, wildlife. If I was going at a speed there where I wasn't able to change my line, I would have had a collision with that bird. And I think the bird would have come off worse. The bike is a very comfortable place to be over long distances. I've done quite a bit of long distance riding on this bike, and it's one of those bikes that just lulls you into a sense of security. You know, it's quite easy to switch off on this bike. You know, you do have to remind yourself to stay alert when you're riding long distances. It's that comfortable and that good. A lot of people are put off by owning a Benelli bike because of the China connection. The one thing that I will say is that a lot of bikes are made in China now, even your Japanese bikes and your European bikes. They all have components and manufacturing facilities in China, and because of the high standards that those companies require, it's really brought up the Chinese side of manufacturing to a higher standard. So much to the fact that, you know, on the lower price range bikes, the mid price range bikes, I think they are really closing the gap, and there's not a lot of difference in it now in build quality and reliability. Obviously they can't compete with the very expensive brands, the expensive bikes, the £20,000 plus bikes, but don't let it put you off. Go out, you will be you know, pleasantly surprised at the build quality and the ride quality of some of these bikes that have been made in China. The one thing that also puts people off with Benelli, I guess, is there's not a lot of dealers, or there's not a big dealer network throughout the country. But I think that as more people take the plunge and give Benelli bikes a go, and more reviews get out there and the word gets around just how good the bikes are, then I think that, like Skoda, when they first came out, they gave some horrible cars, but you know, Skoda cars now are quite good. They've got quite a good name, and I think the same will happen with Benelli. People will realise, you know, just what they're getting, the amount of value for money that they get when they buy a Benelli bike. I bought this bike, I took a chance on it. I was looking at buying the Honda Africa Twin. You know, you talk about comparisons, it's a 20 grand bike with all the whistles and bells on it, and I just happened to come across this. It got 1,000 miles on the clock. I paid just over £4,000 for it, and I thought, you know, take a chance, what have I got to lose? I could keep it for 6 months and then sell it on, most probably lose no money on it if I didn't like it. And I'm so glad that I did, because, you know, as I keep saying, value for money. It's just an amazing bike for that amount of cash. And you know, I'm not saying that it's better or as good as a Honda Africa Twin. There's no comparison really. That bike is head and shoulders over this, but you know, there's £15,000 difference between the two bikes, and are you getting £15,000 worth of quality and better bike if you buy the Honda? I don't think so, I really don't. This bike is more than adequate for everything I want to do. It's fun to ride through the twisties. I feel safe on this bike. I'm comfortable on this bike. I can do long distances and go touring on this bike. Everything that, you know, I wanted from the Africa Twin, this does adequately, and am I prepared to pay the premium of an extra £15,000 for that little extra bit of quality that you get from the Honda? Well, I'm not, because you know, if this was an absolute dog and rubbish at everything and breaking down and build quality was terrible and really uncomfy, shaking my teeth out every time I rode it, then yes, I would pay the difference, but it isn't. It's such a good all-rounder, comfortable bike. And I think the looks of the bike as well, I know looks are a very personal thing, but you know, I think the looks of this bike are really nice as well. It looks the business, it looks like an adventure bike should be looking. Okay, that was a short review of the Benelli TRK502X. What do you think about this bike? Are you tempted to take a chance on a Benelli? Leave me comments below. If there's anything you would like to know about the bike, comments below. If you like the review, give me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. Subscribing doesn't cost you anything. All it does is just put a little icon at the side of your channel every time you go on YouTube, so you can get to my channel easily just by clicking on that icon. Well, I'd just like to say everybody safe riding and all the best. Bike Rider Reviews out.